So let's get started. For those of you who are new, we are streaming video and audio. We want to make sure you have a great connection. So turn off any programs in the background, put your phone on silent or mute for the time being. If you do have any connection issues hearing any of our panelists or speakers, it may be because your connection isn't as strong as it could be. If you're using Netflix in the background, if you've got the TV streaming, that might be, turning that off might be a solution. Sometimes you may need, if you need to reconnect. We haven't had any issues so far, but sometimes, there's just one or two people that may need just to reconnect, and that's absolutely fine. To tell you about Migraine and Headache Australia, our mission is to provide trustworthy, reliable information. That's why we're all here. That's why we're doing these sessions and webinars during Migraine and Headache Awareness Week. We also fund research. We fund typically at least one migraine or headache research project each year. And we have done so for the last sort of 10, 15 years. And we also advocate and support people living with migraine and headache disease. And so throughout this week, we've been highlighting one of these topics that speak to our mission in different areas. And tonight, I'd like to just call out some of the new articles that we have on our website that have been medically reviewed. These are new articles that have only recently been added to the website. We haven't done a whole lot of promotion about these, but if you navigate to our menu, to our website, you can find them under the different sections from that top menu. We encourage you to go ahead and read through these. They're fantastic in-depth articles that we've spent quite a bit of effort to put together so that they're current, up-to-date, and medically reviewed. So really, really helpful with information you can trust. So if you have migraine or headache, you are in the right place. If you are a parent, partner, or caregiver, if you'd like to connect with others like yourself, if you want to ask a question to the panel or to the solicitor, we can't say that we can give you personal legal advice today, but we can give you general information. And certainly, if you are living and working with migraine, this is going to be a great session for you. And if you do want to connect or continue the conversation after the panel and the webinar session today, we'd encourage you to join our support group. There's 4,500 participants and members there. It's a free group. It's private and closed. And it's a great way to sort of bounce ideas or suggestions or just get a second opinion from someone who is like yourself that has or lives with migraine. And if this is your first webinar with us, there's going to be a couple of settings at the bottom of your webinar window where you can do reactions. So I'd love to get like a heart or a thumbs up if you know how to use those reactions. We love to see those. It's a great way we can get feedback from you quickly in the webinar. And if you have a question, feel free to put that into the Q&A box. And there's also a chat which you can see as well. If you find the chat distracting, you can minimize or close the chat. You can open it at any time. Same for the Q&A panel. So don't feel like you have to sort of follow along. You can just concentrate on listening to the panel and the expert. So with that, let's get into who's going to be joining us today. So we have Anik, again, welcome back. She's going to be our moderator. She has been with the Brain Foundation and Migraine Headache Australia for 3 years. Those articles I just showed you, most of them are due to her work, and she's been central in producing content for the website, for newsletters, for emails on both Migraine Headache Australia and the Brain Foundation. And she'll be here today moderating and helping us select questions for the panel towards the end of the session. My name is Carl Cincinnati. I should probably introduce myself. I'm the Director of Operations and the lead for Migraine Headache Australia. I'm also someone that's lived with migraine, and I'm very passionate about speaking publicly to anyone who will listen, frankly, but also to workplaces and in media and to government about the need to address migraine, to provide more support, to fund research, and to improve the status quo for people living with migraine across Australia and internationally. To our panel. So we're very lucky to have with us Sarah Abdou. She is a Sydney-based lawyer, specialising in employment and discrimination law, who has a passion for social justice. I couldn't think of a better solicitor to join us today. So I'm very grateful for Sarah, who is generously donating her time and expertise for joining us here. She works with various community legal centres, including the Redfern Legal Centre, the Wirringa Baiya Aboriginal Women's Legal Centre, the Kingsford Legal Centre at UNSW Law School. And she's employed as a solicitor at the Australian Centre of Disability Law and has represented clients at the Fair Work Commission, Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, and the Australian Human Rights Commission. Wow. Thank you. And then we have our panel. Now, I'm going to be asking our panel questions for them to introduce themselves. So I won't share their biographies here, but we have Elle Lines, we have Georgia Spencer, and Megan Chapman. So with that, I would like to invite all of our panel and Sarah to join us, and we'll kick off the official start to our panel. So I've got a couple of questions here. We'll go around the virtual room with some of these questions, and then we'll make sure that we save some time for questions from the audience to our live panel towards the end of the session. So if you have a question, don't be shy about throwing it forward when it arrives, but we will be sort of going through some basic questions first. So to start us off, and for this question, I'd love to hear from each of you, and we'll start with Georgia. Tell us a little bit about you. Like, what is your professional industry, and what role do you currently perform?
So I work in the travel and accommodation industry. I've been a sufferer from migraine ever since I was 13 years old. I'm in my 30s now, so it's definitely been something that has taken a lot of adjusting to, especially when you're dedicating your career to something you're so passionate about and having those roadblocks keep coming up whenever you're trying to get ahead and, really try and make the most of it. My job involves a lot of travel. So I'm on the road a week every month. So I need to keep that in mind as well. So it is definitely a juggling act on my end.
Megan, tell us about what you're doing and where you're at currently.
Good evening. So, my name is Megan and I'm currently 29 years old. And I used to work in the disability and the youth sector. And I was studying a double bachelor degree of psychological science and criminology. And unfortunately, due to migraines, I've recently had to forfeit all activities.
And Elle, can you share with us where, what you currently do and what your industry is?
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. I am a senior director at a marketing communications firm, so really focused on consumer strategy.
Fantastic. And Sarah, we had an introduction for you, but still it'd be great to hear from you what it is you do and whereabouts you are.
Hi, Carl. Thank you for that introduction. I'm a solicitor at the Disability Discrimination, the Australian Centre for Disability. If I can remember my employer, it would be good. The Australian Centre for Disability Law. I currently specialise in disability discrimination for people living with disabilities in New South Wales.
Fantastic. Thank you. Georgia, I know that you live with migraine like just about everyone else here. Can you describe what a typical migraine attack is like for you? And at the moment, roughly how many attacks are you having each month?
Yeah, so mine kind of fall into one of two categories. One is I have a little warning. So my vision starts to go. I start to get that little bit of a headache coming on, and I just know that I need to, go ahead and stop it. So that's the one, and usually that's okay. But when it really gets serious, it's coming on 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, and it is full blown. Can't see, can't hear. I need to be cold, so I will put the fans on, air conditionings on. Unfortunately, I have, obviously like vomiting and, full physical symptoms, and it lasts from anywhere from 12 hours, basically on the dot, all the way through to 48 hours if it's really bad. It's kind of, you get the auras, you get like the precursors, you get the warnings, but then sometimes it just, it doesn't show up. I, on a good month, maybe once or twice a month. On a bad month, it can be anywhere up to 6 times.
Yeah, wow. Megan, tell us what a migraine attack is like for you and how frequently they occur.
So for me personally, I find that I get sensory overload to the point that it's almost like being superhuman or like a dog can sense. So visual and writing is so overwhelming. And for me, the pressure and the tension in my body is a main thing, but the worst would be the nausea, because basically it just eliminates just any activity. And I can definitely feel the pressure in my head. So normally, unfortunately for me, they are quite frequent, on average about 10 a month. So, and they're pretty extreme. They do last for days. Mine are apparently quite extreme, and I think that I'm overdoing it just a little bit.
Elle, tell us about your migraine attacks and frequency.
A typical attack for me would be starting off with fatigue and nausea, very sensitive to light, sound, any kind of, if I'm in a car, any movement, and at times strong smells really get to me as well. My aura usually starts off as dizziness, like the room picks up and is thrown across, or I'm walking on a ship. And then I usually have around mild to medium head pain. So that's actually, relatively okay. And it sits behind my right eye. So I have been chronic for the past 3.5 years. For the majority of that time, between 2 and 3 attacks a week. However, I have had a reduction recently, which is very exciting, and I've gone down to between 5 and 7 attacks a month.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I've seen a celebration claps coming through in the reactions. That's lovely. So shifting now to migraine at work. Georgia, have you had helpful accommodations in the workplace?
I have actually. I'm really lucky. My employer is fantastic. So it's flexible working hours if I need them. Making up the time when I'm back on board, and not just for the migraine days. For the days after, I call it the hangover days, where you can still feel it and you're not at 100% and you're just slower. So being able to work the extra hours, make it up. If I need to go home in the middle of the day as well, it's definitely look after yourself first, absolutely. And they really kind of take into account all of the things that I personally need. So if I need to be away from the screens completely, if I need to go into a dark room for, just a couple of minutes to try and kind of regroup myself, whatever they've been really supportive. With the kind of working from home, the hybrid arrangement, I know that not everyone is as lucky as I am to be able to have that. So if I do need to take a day from home, that's fine. But acknowledge it's definitely not kind of normal for everyone.
Megan, you've worked in several places before. What kind of accommodations, if any, have you had?
Georgia, I'm so grateful to hear that you have the luxury. That's fantastic. Honestly, it is so rare to hear that. Regarding myself, I've worked high-end jobs, from being even a business manager at Mazda to low-end jobs at cleaning. To be completely honest, I haven't actually had much luck with my recent employer. At first, there was a discussion, and unfortunately it ended up backfiring. So I might talk about that later, and I'll pass the torch for now. So thank you.
Yeah, it would definitely be good to go into that a little bit further, particularly as we find out more about what we can ask for and what we're entitled to. And I'm sure Sarah will have some insight there. Elle, have you had accommodations that have been helpful from work?
Yeah, I'm also lucky in terms of being able to have the option of working from home. For me, it's about the stimulation. So I struggle with 2 days in a row in the office. So I'm able to have 2 days in the office and work home, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And that, to me, makes a huge difference. And there has been, my previous job had dimmers on the meeting room lights. And for someone who is really sensitive, no matter if you're kind of in an attack or in the other kind of phases of it, it has been really great to obviously make everyone know that is, the preferred meeting room, and then choose something that would make me more comfortable.
Fantastic. So we're going to ask everyone sort of around the room if they've told the workplace about your migraine condition. But before we do that, I'd like to know what you see are the arguments for telling a workplace that you have migraine. Georgia, what are your initial thoughts?
I'm always for it, purely because I like to have that kind of honesty is the best policy, so that I can be that open book and kind of build the trust, on both sides. So they know that if I do need to take the day, then it is genuine. The way in which I've done it in the past, though, is once I've secured the job that I would like, within that onboarding phase, when you have that one-on-one with your new manager or whoever, you're with, just kind of mentioning it there and say, look, this is something that I suffer with. It is going to be impactful in this number of ways, but and I'll always outline, and I will do X, Y, and Z in order to make up for this time. So I will say it quite early on. And I really think that kind of having that transparency is really important, but then also for the others in the workplace as well. Maybe there's someone else who hasn't spoken up about it, who, hears me being so candid about, living with this issue, that they might then come forward as well. So me personally, I'm always for it.
Megan, how about you? What arguments are there for telling work? And we'll come to what rationale there may be to not tell work, but just for
So I agree wholeheartedly with Georgia. So I believe in being open and honest. You need to have a rapport and a relationship. And I do agree that, to me, they do need to know, just for your moral conscience and for them to know as employers, to have a relationship like that. However, I do believe, you should have a bit of, rapport beforehand. And wait till after probably just being employed and then have a one-on-one maybe discussion with them. And obviously, be prepared with some troubleshooting, some ideas, and walking them through and explaining the situation. So to me, yes, it should never be, you should never be completely, you can't, to me, it is a tricky one. I'm definitely for the cons, but I do believe you should inform your employer. It's, to me, the right thing to do morally.
Elle, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's also, for me personally, I know I'm not as, let's say, animated or in, let's say, more, I suppose I'm more quiet during a tech. And I suppose that me being able to be saying, oh, look, it's a bad day today, that means that no perception is being created that's not accurate. They're like, oh, just a bad day, so she's a bit quiet, rather than anything else. So I have found that that's been quite helpful. So I don't need to pretend that I'm feeling a way that I'm not.
Yeah. Sarah, I'd like to get your perspective on this. We will analyze the cons of telling people, but I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts about what may be some reasons why you would tell your employer that you have migraine.
Thanks, Carl. I think it's really reassuring that close to 50% of the audience have actually answered yes to disclosing to work, and why that's reassuring, even though I can very much appreciate that it'd be quite difficult at times, is that it allows you to request your rights. If your employer doesn't know that you have a medical condition, it is more difficult for you to ask for reasonable adjustments under the Disability Discrimination Law. Additionally, it is harder for you to argue that if you are managed out because of your time off work or treated differently because you do need some adjustments, if your employer doesn't know that you suffer from this health condition, it's more difficult for you to argue that you've been discriminated against on the basis of your disability.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's look at the risks or the potential negative outcomes so that we have a balanced sort of perspective on this. So, Georgia, I'll start with you. What do you feel like are some of the risk or negative outcomes by talking about migraine at work with your employer?
Yeah, for sure. I think it is a big worry for a lot of people. What could happen? What might the repercussions be? And I think it stems to kind of people not understanding what migraine is and how it actually impacts you. The whole, have a glass of water, have a Panadol, you'll be fine. It doesn't cut it. But a lot of us, I can imagine, hear it all the time when we kind of talk about it with people who may not understand. So that kind of not understanding coming from your colleagues or from your management. But then if you're not as confident in disclosing something medical to people who you're working with for fear of, maybe you're not given as many opportunities because someone who you're going, or, one of your colleagues or one of your competitors may not have something like that. They may not suffer with migraine, and missing out on opportunities, and maybe not active discrimination, but definitely kind of passive. It's in the background. People are thinking about it. And that worry and, just being treated slightly differently, but not in a way that is beneficial for anybody.
Megan, what are your thoughts?
What a can of worms this is. I'll try to keep it brief. So I do Excuse me. So there are a lot of risks. Even with my recent job, basically, by disclosing about with migraines, it was actually used against me in terms of they passed off a lot of my work and eventually weeded me out, saying that they didn't want to create more stress and just using it as like when I didn't even take time off, just passing off some work and slowly, yeah, weeding me out. And discriminations, well, the stigma is actually a very big one. So working, yeah, at in a very toxic masculine workplace environment, they would antagonize any kind of conditions, of course. So they could, call it a sickie for being hungover, but how dare I have a headache? And I found that it actually got a lot of co-workers to speak up about their own things. There was a lady suffering with endometriosis and a lot of other things. And it got to the point that that workplace environment was so toxic that a bulk of people, we all sort of signed up to go and leave at the same time, and it worked out well. And to me, that discrimination, definitely, with a lot of workplaces, I understand from a business perspective, liability and reliability, they're two big key risks. And unfortunately, a lot of them are uncomfortable with wanting to adjust, which I completely understand. And pretty much essentially, yeah, you are a negative from the beginning, which is why it's a very hard topic to come across. And also I found in my personal experience, even though they might have a slight understanding of migraines, so they may suffer from them, their symptoms and experience is completely different. So for them, theirs might go in within an hour. And so they don't understand the full impact it has on your functional capacity. So to me, yeah, there's a long list in my head of the risks. So thank you.
Elle, what do you see as the risks and potential negative outcomes from talking about it at work?
Yeah, I think it's something that really has to be navigated from my experience. You want to honestly share what the impact is to you. However, you also don't want to make it sound like you can't perform to do the role. And I think that has been the trickiest to navigate. And I think that, relating back to my experience when I was first diagnosed finally, and at that point had become chronic, I wasn't believed, and got told many times point blank when I would share what the symptoms were, etc. I think that was very challenging at the time because I couldn't advocate for myself at that point. And I think that was my biggest learning.
Sarah, you spoke about some of the reasons why you might want to tell the employer. Can you think of any risks or negative outcomes that people should be aware of before making the decision?
Definitely. Unfortunately, the reason why I have a job is because disability discrimination happens all the time. The two biggest areas that I see are in education and in employment. And Megan, your experience, you're definitely not alone in experiencing that kind of treatment at work after disclosure. And yes, Elle, you've hit the nail on the head there by saying you want to be careful when asking for adjustments and then making sure that you're still perceived as capable of performing the inherent requirements of the role. So while there are a whole host of laws under both disability discrimination and employment law that prohibits employers from taking negative action or discriminatory action against people with disabilities, whether that's migraine or any other health condition. The unfortunate reality is sometimes there are direct ways where people are discriminated against or indirect ways where people are just managed out after disclosure.
Everyone here has been so honest and transparent, and I feel like I need to make a confession. And that is that when I had chronic migraine and I was working for a Fortune 500 employer, I didn't have the courage to tell them. I saw discrimination taking place. And I saw a manager scoff at an employee who had to leave due to a migraine. And at the time, I was hiding and struggling, and I was ashamed, and I'd internalized the stigma that was, around migraine in the workplace. And I ended up leaving, and they never knew that migraine was the reason that I left. And it did affect my work by the time I had left. And it was, it was just an awful place psychologically and emotionally to be in. And I really struggled, and I felt, isolated because of that. And so for me, I would never say that, you have to tell, or you should always tell, or that you should never tell. I think that's a very individual decision, and depends on the circumstances, and depends on the culture of the organization, and even your manager to a certain extent, because you can have a great organizational culture, but if your manager, rolls their eyes in the meeting where you're talking about migraine or other sort of invisible conditions, then, you're rightly going to be on guard. So it's a very personal thing that can be very intricate and requires careful thought and strategy, I think. So it seems like Georgia and Elle, you have told your workplace. Megan, you've also told your workplace, your employers before. So it seems like in the panel, I'm the only one that hasn't. Well, I'm doing my best to make up for that. I apologize, but now that we kind of know some of the pros and some of the cons of making that decision and telling people, let's start talking about if we are going to make that decision, when is the right time to initiate a conversation? Sarah, I might start with you for this. When would you say people should think about telling, if they are intending to tell at some point? Should they tell before they get the job, shortly after they get the job? What do you advise?
Oh, look, but it's really difficult to answer this question. As you've mentioned, it is very subjective, and it really very much depends on the role, on the condition, the kind of environment that you're going into. And sometimes you don't know whether your workplace will be accommodating, whether your manager is going to be understanding or not. I have seen people disclose health conditions prior to the role or after an offer, but before commencement, before full, officially starting, and that offer of employment is then reneged. So it's a risk that, okay, they'll pull that offer from under the table, from under the rug, if you do disclose a health condition. However, in saying that, the earlier that you do disclose, as Georgia mentioned, sometimes it does help establish trust and confidence between the employer and the employee. It also means that you can request for adjustments. You can always request for adjustments or make a request for reasonable adjustments under the Disability Discrimination Act. One thing to bear in mind, though, as well, is if you wanted to be strategic and just test the waters before disclosing, because, I'd completely appreciate that kind of a strategy. And it would be to be employed for 12 months, for a year, with an employer under the Fair Work Act. After that period of time, if you're a permanent, a regular casual, or a part-time employee, you do have the right to make a flexible working arrangement request. A lot of people in the comments have referred to flexible work, so that could be a strategy.
Yeah, that's very helpful to know. So just to kind of replay that back, you get a special set of accommodations after 12 months with your employer. Are there any, does the employer have to have a minimum amount of employees, like a size, to qualify for that?
No, not under the Fair Work Act. Under the Disability Discrimination Law, you can ask for adjustments from before you're employed or from the day that you commence. But if we're going to look at the Fair Work Act, and it's quite clear that if you're a parent of a school-aged child or younger, or if you're a person living with a disability, that once that 12-month mark hits, you can ask for working from home or changing your hours of work.
Fantastic. Does anyone else want to comment on, when they sort of think is a good time to initiate the conversation if they are planning to do that from the panel? And whilst we're sort of thinking about that, Sarah, just to confirm, we are not legally obliged or required, I should say, to disclose that we have migraine. Like that's an individual choice that we can make. Is that right?
That's correct.
So some people from the community have mentioned to me that it may be worth initiating a conversation when migraine is getting worse, for example, and it's affecting your work. If reasonable accommodations can make a big difference, or if you'd like to ask HR to appeal any sort of adverse benefit determinations, or to support you to ask for specific accommodations, like if you wanting a fragrance-free workplace, or to change the lighting, things like that. And there may be sort of some other options to think about as well. I'd like to get sort of the opinion from the panel about this suggestion, which is to engage your employer early on before you have a lot of absences, so that you can explain to them what's going on and set expectations. Megan, how would you respond? Do you think that's helpful advice, or is that leading people astray?
If I'm being completely honest, thank you so much for being open and honest. So I actually have only told one employer to see what would happen. In all my previous positions, I never actually informed them. Even when things got bad, they had no idea what I was dealing with. And to me, that bit of advice, there's pros and cons to that as well. And I've been debating on this for a little while, thinking engaging your employer when is the right time. And to me, yet again, of course, it's circumstantial. There's so many aspects, but I do believe you probably should try to initiate a conversation, because there are going to be days where you're not going to be at your best. You're not going to be able to function. And I think it's wise for them to just know what is happening. And even if it comes with repercussions, you're doing the right thing. Hopefully you feel that way. So I believe it's sort of, I'm sitting on the fence with that one, but I probably would sway towards actually yes. Despite my experience with myself, I would say, yeah, probably yes.
Elle, would you encourage people to engage their employer early on before you have a lot of absences, so they kind of know what's going on? How would you is that helpful for people, do you think, or not?
I think, again, it's so dependent on who you're kind of talking with. I have actually been disclosing that when an offer has been made for a job, to have that frank conversation to say, I live with chronic migraine and this is what it means. And therefore, I am able to say what I do need is accommodations in terms of working from home, that if it's not a good day, that I am okay to work from home and that's not going to be held against me because I'm not in the office. So doing it that way for me personally has been really beneficial. I had gone into it with the kind of thought process of, if they have an issue, then it's not the right fit, because I knew then the impact that it would have on me if I was to put myself in that position. And so I think that is why I do tell them during the interview process if I'm going for a job. And then I like to take my team out for one-on-ones, and I let them know. And then I let them know, look, this is what I live with. And you might, hear from me about X, Y, and Z. And look, with previous team members, I have been so comfortable because of, our relationship, that I'll join meetings with my ice beanie on and we all have a good laugh. But you know what? I'm there, I'm present. I'm also showing what reality looks like for me. And I think for me personally, that has been a really important point of my journey.
Yeah, fantastic. And I can see in the reactions as well, people love that idea. I think it's a brilliant idea because I was about to ask you, have you had offers pulled away? But it doesn't, in some sense, it doesn't even matter, because if the offer is pulled away just because you told them that you have migraine, if they're going to retract in such a violent way, it saves you probably 3 to 6 months of just misery, not knowing that it's probably going to be an awful environment for you if people are people are like that. So I think that's a great sort of suggestion for people to consider. Georgia, you've obviously had the conversation with your employer. What tips would you give people when they're planning to initiate a conversation with them about it?
I think timing is definitely key. And it really, again, it's very, very personal. So it depends on the relationship you have with the person that you're talking to and how you want to approach it. If you feel as though that person's going to be more receptive to something like a scheduled meeting, sit down, have an agenda, this is something really important that I want to talk to you about, and kind of approach it that way. Or if it's over a morning coffee and just have a more casual conversation and, you know, make it a little bit more personal. It would really depend on how you have that relationship. Me personally, I go for the kind of the halfway in between. Like, I will schedule something in, but will definitely be a little bit more casual, and have the points, like I said, like what it means for me, what it's going to impact, what, you know, the impact on the team, on myself, on potentially performance, but then, you know, how I'm going to combat it, and then have that opportunity to say, you know, some days I might need some additional support, but we'll be sure that if anyone else in the team needs support on a day that potentially they're struggling with something, I can then also jump in to kind of do my part. I think talking quite candidly as well and being really honest about how it does affect you. But I think, as we probably all know, when you're in an attack and you're at work, it's very obvious. People are going to notice. They're going to see that you're struggling. They're going to see that you're in pain, and they will then kind of physically see what's actually happening and that it is, you know, affecting you in your day to day.
Sarah, how would you encourage people to initiate the conversation? What tips do you give them?
Yeah, I think sometimes it really just depends, Georgia, on timing. And somebody in the chat has mentioned, what if my employer provides a health questionnaire? I think that's a really, really good question. If you're asked about your any kind of medical conditions that may impact your work prior to employment, you do have a requirement to be honest. Otherwise, that will that may impact you later down the track. Full and frank disclosure, I'm also someone who lives with a health condition or a disability. I like saying health condition. It's not migraines, but there are times where I haven't disclosed to my employer, Carl, and other times where I've had the conversation with management and tried to just say, hey, look, by the way, I need 1, 2, 3 to perform my role, and this is why I need it. And just a really quick, clear conversation about what my needs are and why I need them. And that's worked, but every environment is different.
Yeah, that question I saw from Meredith as well about a medical questionnaire as part of the job. Does the workplace have a right to ask? Like, if we're not required to disclose it, why are they allowed to ask us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's actually a grey area of law. It's not super straightforward. So the employer does have the right to ask where, for example, there's a workplace health and safety risk. They can only ask for things that are relevant to that role. So yeah, they can't ask for everything under the sun. You know, so it really, and you know, then what they do with that information, you know, may mean that there's a disability discrimination complaint, depending if that's the reason why they're asking for that information. So under Section 30 of the Disability Discrimination Act, an employer does have the right to ask for medical information where it is to accommodate or make adjustments for an employee or a prospective employee. But if they're going to use that information to discriminate against a person, then it would be an unlawful request.
So coming to a few legal questions, we have rights as employees. What general protections are in place for people that are living and working with migraine? What are our rights at work?
So many. That's the good news. The good news is that there are a lot of rights. There's something that has popped up a couple of times in this panel is the right to make adjustments or request for adjustments. What reasonable adjustments means, that just depends on the context. So, you know, even the one uniform health condition, migraines, everyone experiences it in different ways, as all the panelists have mentioned. So you can ask for lights to be dimmed. You can ask for noise cancelling headphones, for example. The possibilities are really endless. You have the right to not be fired on the basis of your health condition. You have the right to be protected against any adverse action. An adverse action can include not being offered the job, being terminated, or having your adverse action can also include having your pay reduced or your hours cut on the basis of a protected characteristic, or having like a disability.
Is migraine classified as a disability? I saw a few people asking that. Is it considered a disability?
Yeah, so look, that's a really interesting question, and I'm surprised it hasn't popped up earlier in the discussion. But yes, the short answer is yes, because the definition of disability under the Disability Discrimination Act is quite broad. So Section 4 would cover migraines as well as a whole host of other conditions that you wouldn't have otherwise thought are covered.
What is the Fair Work Act, and how might that influence some of what we're entitled to or some of the protections in place for people with migraine at work?
Yep. So the Fair Work Act is a piece of legislation that covers all national system employees, and it essentially protects against disability discrimination at work. It also allows or provides the opportunity for people with disabilities to request flexible working arrangements. That's the short answer.
And who's covered by some of these protections? Like if we're a full-time employee, I would imagine we would be covered. But what if we're casual or part-time?
Yeah, so the right to be not discriminated against at work because of a disability, like that's a uniform right. It doesn't matter whether you are a part-time employee, a casual employee, you're a contractor even, or a full-time employee. Protections under the Disability Discrimination Act cover all of those types of workers, as well as protections against disability discrimination under the Fair Work Act also cover all of those types of workers.
Megan mentioned earlier that she had a pretty toxic culture, and that there was probably a bit of bullying and discrimination going on. What protections are there in place for bullying specifically?
Yeah, bullying is an interesting one. You can lodge a stop bullying order with the Fair Work Commission. However, in my experience, that's just a bit of a slap on the wrist. There are other ways that you can, make the employer accountable or request your rights. So you can put in a complaint, depending on the scenario and on your circumstances, a disability discrimination complaint with the Australian Human Rights Commission, and you'd have 24 months from the date of discrimination to do that. You also have, if you were dismissed on the basis of your disability or exercising a workplace right, like requesting a flexible working arrangement that was refused, or taking some time off work as well, that's a workplace right. You have 21 days to lodge a general protections claim with the Fair Work Commission after being dismissed. If you weren't dismissed, but you had some of that negative action taken against you that I was referring to earlier, like your position was changed or your hours and days were cut or your pay was reduced, then you have 6 years to lodge a general protections claim, not involving dismissal, with the Fair Work Commission.
If someone feels like they've been discriminated against at work, what action can they take?
You can raise an internal complaint. If, however, the workplace is not accommodating, and then raising a complaint may not, be of any benefit. If the workplace itself, if the culture is so toxic that you raising a complaint is just going to aggravate your situation further, then you might want to consider legal routes. But definitely an internal complaint is the first route available to you, and then you can take it externally. You can also resign and leave the job. However, the issue with resigning is that it does limit to a certain extent the kind of legal claims that you can bring against your employer.
Right. And these are pretty extreme examples. I think that sometimes, like, it's kind of like you're going to the courts and sort of legal. It can be kind of the last resort in many respects, but sometimes maybe even bringing in a letter from the doctor and speaking to HR. Like, if you've got a manager that's rolling their eyes and doesn't appreciate that, well, that's a pretty poor, there's some pretty poor traits in that manager. And, going into HR potentially with a letter from the doctor that validates that you have a legitimate neurological condition, can go a long way, right? And HR can speak to the manager's manager, and there can be consequences for the manager if they're not,
definitely. Sorry, I did jump straight away, just being, being a lawyer, jump straight away to the legal route, but definitely non-legal routes, like actually requesting adjustments, putting them in writing, providing medical advice, speaking to HR, or speaking to a different manager can also be beneficial. But yeah, thank you, Carl.
Yeah, and it's a tricky one because, like, I know from firsthand experience that it's often your manager that goes in to bat for you behind closed doors when you're talking about promotions and career prospects. And so the relationship with your manager is paramount. And that's why I think it comes down to being such an individual choice about whether you disclose that you have migraine or not. And sometimes you may feel like you don't have a choice because migraine is so frequent or so debilitating that you're not able to hide it. And for you to be able to perform your work to the same quality of everyone else without migraine, you need those accommodations. And if you get them, you can perform your job and then some, right? So it may not be as simple as making a decision. Your hand might be forced in some respects. So I'd love to go now to some of the questions. There's been some great questions, and Kerry, your question about discrimination was fantastic, and Meredith about those forms. Send those questions through. I'll go now to some of the questions that have been coming through from the audience. And the first one was from Deidre, wondering about how you stand if you've exceeded your sick leave entitlements. Are you still covered? This is a situation she encountered a few years ago.
Yeah. Just to get a bit of context, sorry, when you're saying you've exhausted your sick leave entitlements, are we talking, how much time off work in a 12-month period would you have taken off? Or maybe I'll just answer generally.
Maybe just answer generally, just in case.
Generally.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a bit of a balancing act. It's a bit tricky. I think Ellie's mentioned it before, or it's a balancing act between performing the inherent requirements of the role and just being able to care for yourself. There are protections under the Fair Work Act to say that you can be temporarily ill or absent from work and not be fired because of it. But in saying that protection doesn't exist or no longer applies when an employee has been off work for 3 months in a 12-month period. So that's just something to bear in mind. Also, under the Disability Discrimination Law, it does refer to reasonable adjustments. So that might be a route to explore with your employer, as opposed to just taking time off work as well.
Sarah, we had another question from Tristan and a related one from Jane talking about receiving total permanent disability payout claims through superannuation for chronic migraine. And Jane also sort of wanted to know whether chronic migraine is covered in income protection.
That's a little bit outside of my expertise. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really comment on that.
That's okay.
Really know.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Adam had a question about migraine being bad enough that even with accommodations, you're unable to work for a significant amount of time. Is that something that the employer should know about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. On the one hand, you've got the Fair Work Act, which is a little bit stricter in a sense. It says, okay, you shouldn't be discriminated against unless you can't perform the inherent requirements of the role, and you've got you've got the right to take time off work, so long as it's within these strict parameters of 3 months within a 12-month period. But then on the other hand, you have the Disability Discrimination Act, and that's very broad, and it says, okay, you've got the right to make request adjustments, and that's from the beginning. And you have the right not to be terminated because of your disability. You have the right not to be discriminated against directly or indirectly. Indirect disability discrimination is where you are required to comply with a condition that you can't comply with because of your disability. So if your employer is requiring you, you've got to be in the office 5 days a week, you've got to be at work, for this amount of time, that can be in and of itself disability discrimination. The defence of the employer is whether the employee can perform the inherent requirements of the role, and that's never a straightforward question. And often, employers do rely on that, and I'm sorry to say, but fluff a bit sometimes about, well, what are the inherent requirements of the role? Do you have to be in the office full time to perform that role, or is it possible to work flexibly? And that the law with disability discrimination says, and I'm going to try to say this as simply as possible or as clearly as possible, that the defence of inherent requirements that an employer can rely on can only be relied on after the employer has actually made the adjustments. So it's, can the person perform the inherent requirements of the role with or without the adjustments being made? So I hope that answers the question, but I think I might have gone on a tangent.
So if you can perform the role with accommodations, then that's enough, right? Or do you have to be able to perform the role without the accommodations in the first place first?
That you've hit the nail on the head, Carl. Yeah. So you need to perform the inherent requirements of the role, but with the adjustments as well. So the employer should try to accommodate first.
Yeah. And just to go back, I know we spoke about this before, but when an employer asks you if you have any condition that affects your ability to do the job, it's one thing if you're a truck driver or driving a forklift and you have migraine with auras frequently that blind your vision, right? That could be dangerous. You're operating heavy machinery. You probably need to disclose that you have migraine with aura. That makes sense. But if you have migraine and you've got a role that should be able to accommodate you with flex time, be able to make up, you have deadlines, but you have flexibility around working and remote working, do you need to disclose that you have migraine and to that employer?
That's a really good question, Carl. Look, it's not that straightforward. So it really does depend on the employer themselves, the role itself, and your condition and its manifestations. So, and your individual experience of that particular health condition. So it really does depend.
What is I might ask this question to the panel for anyone who wants to jump in. How would you tell your team or workplace, or if you're in an open plan area, like the immediate open plan like environment, not to wear perfume or strong fragrances? Has anyone got any suggestions about how you go about doing that in a way that doesn't make you enemy number one in that workplace? Megan?
Okay, I'll
Thank
go. So when I worked at the dealership, a lot of people were very heavy smokers, and of course, you've had a lot of males that are, Lynx body spray to the max, and basically it is a hard conversation. It's kind of like on the 100 they covered this recently about Australian debate of should you eat canned tuna in an open office, which sparked a lot of debate. But a lot of people sided with if you're in a very close quarters, you probably shouldn't eat canned tuna. And it is very difficult, especially like there are people that even have just heightened senses. Not that they even suffer from migraines, but they can really detect smell as well. So it is a very difficult, excuse me, it's a very difficult conversation to have. I would probably suggest along the lines of maybe bringing up that, you know, there's a lot of like a lot of smells going on all at once, and asking them, have they ever had an experience where they've walked into a room and it's just overpowering, it's just whoa, or like someone's come out of the toilet and it's like whoa. So trying to go about it in a casual demeanor, just trying to be funny about it is sort of how I've approached it in the past. And just try to utilize little things, like what can I do myself first? So I've heard of all kinds of things, you know, Vaseline under the nose and whatnot. Obviously, yeah, the world, it's going to be tricky because, yeah, the world won't accommodate for us, but there needs to be some adjustments. So having that sort of rapport and trying to sort of go about it in a casual, funny demeanor, I think is probably the best way to initiate. And then after that, it's sort of a matter of, depending on what it is, for example, if it's too much perfume, maybe just bringing that up and just also checking with other people if they've found that, you know, that it's a very strong scent or they might be using quite a lot of it. So just having some people maybe validate before you go and approach that person as well, so you're not feeling like you're one-on-one. And maybe just suggesting that because it smells so good, they only need to put like 1 or 2 squirts on at most, and then they're good for the day. So trying to make it lighthearted is all I'd suggest.
That makes a lot of sense. Like, you know, it's about having like a light touch and sort of making it a suggestion rather than a mandate and stomping your foot. Yeah, no, I think that's very helpful. Thank you. I feel like we could talk for another entire hour, and we've got so many great questions. I apologize, we're not going to get time to go to all of them, but these are really fantastic, and it's been wonderful to have you on the panel. I want to go to just a few more questions before we wrap up. Nicole mentioned that she said that she, you know, has to fight with coworkers to close the blinds, and that can be really difficult. And I think there's a lot of these sort of very individual sort of scenarios where it comes down to your relationship and how you approach that individual. And as Megan, as you suggested, sort of having like a lighthearted approach that's not forceful. And in doing so in a way that's not sort of confrontational either. You can always go to HR and say, hey, like I had just a gentle word to so-and-so. You know, it's not, you know, you can sort of suggest to them that you'd really appreciate it. It really helps you do kind of your work. And if they can just hear it from another person, sometimes they just may not remember. It may be not top of mind. And HR can have a gentle word with them. Yeah, it really does kind of depend. But those, you know, small things can be quite helpful. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave with the audience? And I'll just go to the panel, to, you know, Georgia and Elle and to others as we wrap up tonight. Any final thoughts or tips that you'd share, Georgia?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how everyone has their own unique experience, but it sounds like we've all faced the exact same hurdles. It doesn't matter what the workplace is, we've all got the same worries and the same issues, and, you know, the same little things that we're all facing while living with migraine in the workplace. So I think that relying on the community is always a really good thing, and getting tips and tricks from each other. And you never know who else may be struggling with the same thing. I've had, you know, 3 colleagues in my current company who have said, you know, I think that I'm also struggling with migraines. I didn't know what it was, but, you know, you're talking about it all the time. So I'm going to go and get checked out. And it turns out that they also had them. So I think for us to be out there and talking about it, having the conversations is really worthwhile.
Wonderful. Thank you. Elle?
Yeah, I'd also say, I think we're so hard on ourselves. We always want to perform at our best. And it was a challenge that I personally needed to overcome, to admit to myself that I can't perform at my best during a migraine attack. And so I think that that's one thing that I would share: be kind to yourself and understand that whatever your goals are for that day, they may be small, they may be big, but set them to how you're feeling and you'll smash them, well, hopefully. It's a good goal to have to hope for.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah, Megan, any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yes, I know we spoke today a lot about challenges that you may face in the workplace in relation to disclosure and in relation to your experience with migraines. But I just wanted to reassure you that there are plenty of protections out there, both on a federal and state level, and that, ideally, while things aren't resolved, are resolved amicably, there are legal protections out there. And yes, Carl, I'd agree with you that a lot of things will, depend on your relationship and how you communicate, and communicating positively and persistently, no matter how difficult it may be.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. Megan, I'll let you have the final word.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for what we've learned tonight and what we've discussed. And my take hold is going to be finding a way to summarize and print out my rights, because I've never actually thought of that before until Sarah kindly walked us through some things. And I just want to thank absolutely everyone that is going through this journey. I mean, it is incredible, honestly, to see a network of people that I do believe that change is going to happen with people like you, Carl, that change is going to happen. Things are going to change has been my mantra lately. So honestly, thank you everyone so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Megan. And I think thank you to everyone in the audience. Having a toolkit, I think, for employers and for employees is going to be an upcoming priority for us at Migraine Headache Australia, just based on this conversation, based on the community tonight. I feel like that would benefit a lot of people, so that we can provide a framework and help people make informed decisions, whatever that decision is, whether it's to tell or to withhold for the time being about their migraine condition, but also for employers to make workplaces a better place for all of us living and working with migraine. Thank you so much to everyone on the panel. Megan, Sarah, Georgia, Elle, really appreciate you donating your time and expertise tonight. Thank you to our audience. I hope to see you all tomorrow. We've got a wrap-up webinar. We're going to have event highlights. We'll be talking about some of the favorite moments from the entire week, and we'll be answering a whole bunch of questions. And that'll be with Anik and myself. So we look forward to seeing you there. But for now, thank you again so much, and good night.